Hi, I'm Lenny Pickett, and I was on David Bowie's Serious Moonlight tour in 1983 as a saxophone player and woodwind player. I also played a little bit of electronics with a wind synthesizer controller and wore a costume and was part of the cast that he put up on the stage. I was 28 when I started rehearsing with him and turned 29 during the rehearsals, and so I was fairly young when I did it. I'd been the saxophone player, the saxophone soloist with Tower of Power for a number of years preceding that, and I'd worked with David's producer, Nile Rodgers, on some projects before I met David. I didn't play on the Let's Dance album, but I did play on the tour, and I worked with David subsequently to that. We did a few other projects, album projects after that, and I was a participant in the Serious Moonlight tour. I was a fan of David's before I did the tour. I was aware of his work, but not exceedingly so. I mean, I remember, I was like a lot of people. I heard the music on the radio and I was interested in it. I was also a new wave fan, so I'd listened to a lot of the new wave period music and was interested in the English punk scene as well, and in Iggy Pop and people like that, people who David had some involvement with. I was interested in Brian Eno, and I'd met Eno, and I'd met David Byrne and people like that before I met David. So I was familiar with some of the people that were around David, and I was familiar with certainly his hits, Young Americans. Because it had the David Sanborn solo on it, and Fashion. I remember the sort of funkier version of David Bowie was something I was, maybe more familiar with. Oh, the first time I met David was, I believe, at a rehearsal in New York, and I can't remember where we rehearsed now, but it was, a sort of dingy New York rehearsal hall, and he came in. We'd been rehearsing a little bit already with Carlos Alomar, and David met us all, at one point. I can't remember exactly when that was now, but early on in the rehearsal process, before we went to Texas to do the big on-stage rehearsals, we all got together and played music. He seemed very quiet. David was a quiet person, very private, but engaging, affable. He seemed to me someone who was very comfortable existing in multiple presentations of himself. He was one way with the public in the sense that he understood how to deal with the press and media that was interested in him, and he had a sort of interesting camaraderie with the musicians that was very comfortable and natural. He understood what his role had to be in different circumstances and was very good at doing that. There were enough dates, and the setup was big enough that it required in the States at least, two separate sets of trucks, two separate sets of semi-trucks that would leapfrog from one venue to the next, so that we could play dates that were where the venues were fairly far apart, but we could play them 2 days away from each other, and they'd be set up for us when we got there. It was very much like most rock and roll tours in many respects, the usual set of pirate road crew people. It's a lot, traveling in that sort of situation. The crew especially reminds you of like a crew on a ship. But David mixed up the crew. There were different people from different countries. We had our wardrobe person Robin was from Australia, and Lennys, the makeup artist, was from New Zealand, and most of the band was from the United States. So it was a multinational trip, and very technically sophisticated. I mean, if you look at the stuff on YouTube now that was shot apparently from the monitors that we were using, there were large screens above the stage that you could watch David close up. If you look at those things, they look like fairly well produced rock videos at this point. And considering when it was done, that it was 25 years ago, it's pretty sophisticated. The whole setup was very sophisticated, and I thought very artistically well conceived, and there was a kind of simplicity and minimalist quality to it that read extremely well from a distance. The smoke-filled plastic faux, Greek columns and all those things were really remarkably simple devices, but they had a lot of theatrical potential. I mean, you could light the smoke in different ways, and the columns would change colors, and it was a pretty interesting thing to look at. I think we were, as a group, we were all pretty impressed by it. It was a big rock and roll tour, so there were compromises all around. I mean, if you walked in front of Earl Slick's amplifier, it was like there was a wind blowing at you. It was so loud, and the keyboard setup was right next to us, and it was extraordinarily loud. The musicians were trying to be stadium rock musicians, and so they played with the appropriate volume. That helps, I think, in some respect, to give a sort of power to the performance. Playing, a 19th century device like a saxophone is a little bit awkward when you're, confronted with, large 20th century technology. So we did the best we could. We had, adequate monitoring systems, but everybody was hearing something different depending on what part of the stage you were. You were hearing your monitors for your situation, and something you just had to adapt to. But that's not unusual. That's the typical rock and roll setup. Nowadays, there's a lot more in-ear monitors and things like that, where you can have your own specific monitor situation, and you have no idea what the rest of the people are hearing. You're just hearing what you need to hear in order to do your performance, and you rely on the sound people to get it right. It was convivial, it was very, very loose. There was, a certain amount of hijinks and the usual rock and roll stuff that, you can use your imagination with. But it was, at the same time, it was, it wasn't gritty on any level at all. It wasn't like, it wasn't grimy. It was a pretty elevated sort of experience. We were learning a lot. It was a very interesting, opportunity to see things. I'd never been to Australia before, and I'd never been to New Zealand before. And seeing those parts of the world was, the way we were doing it was fascinating. I'd never been to Thailand before, or Singapore, or Hong Kong, but going into those places as part of a celebrated tour gave you even a more interesting view of them, because you had access to things you might not have otherwise have access to. It's like different. I'm funny that way. I like different moments of different things. There's like a part of China Girl that I really, really liked, and we didn't do that song very much on the tour. Some of the earlier stuff, Space Oddity, I think is an interesting song. I like Fashion, and I liked Fame. I liked Fashion, I liked Fame. I remember them being particularly striking at the time that I heard them. I remember I was working with Tower Power in the studio when I first heard Fame, and it was, a very, interesting sort of edgy combination of funk rhythm and a sort of heavier metally sounding guitar sounds, which was maybe the first time we heard that. I mean, that became like a genre after that. But when that first came out, it was clearly an interesting engagement between the two. There were other things, sort of similar matchups of that. I mean, with Sly Stone was sort of the opposite direction, where he was, it was less, the rock thing was infused over the funk thing, and this was more like the funk thing was infused over the rock thing. It was an interesting, way of approaching it. I hate to be so, non-specific, but it's the way I listen to music. I usually pick out a certain aspect of a song that I like, and I generally like, things for different reasons, and I don't normally pick favorites, because that's just not the way my musical experience is. I have things that have greater and lesser effect on me, and it might be like the bridge of one song, or the lyric in one song, or the rhythm of another song. So it's, it's a difficult question to answer.